Hi guys, it's Laurel Ann. I'm here to wrap up the month of March by talking about all the books that I read. The first book I finished in March was Heart Full of Lies by Ann Rowell. This is the true crime story of a woman named Lisa Northen, I think that's how you pronounce it, who shot and killed her third husband, Chris, while they were on a camping trip. She claimed self-defense, but the physical evidence doesn't really seem to back that up. This is mostly a character study of Lisa in which Ann Rowell really tries to examine and get to the bottom of how and why this happened. My feelings about this book are pretty mixed. The story is certainly compelling and that's what kept me reading. It's certainly very well researched. You really can't help but be impressed by the work that she puts into her books. This is the first one I've read, but I'm assuming that they're all like this. But at the end of the day, the execution just didn't work that well for me. I don't really like her writing. It's mostly written in a, frankly, pretty outdated journalistic style, but it also kind of feels like she wanted to be a little bit literary. So it's a mix of prose that's very removed and straightforward, and then with random sentences that are very florid. Just to read a sentence that I underlined in here because it just like baffled me. This is describing Lisa, the woman who has been described for the last 58 pages. Like the whole book is about her. Yet she has this sentence on page 58 describing her this way. Like many sun lovers, the woman wore the tiniest of bikini bathing suits with just enough cloth to keep her from nakedness. I'm sorry. She also just doesn't trust her readers. Like if she tells us something once, she tells us 100 times. For example, the woman Lisa liked to write and she sort of had aspirations of being a writer. And so every single time that she brings up Lisa writing something, whether it was a screenplay or her journal or an email, Ann Rowell then reminds us that Lisa really liked writing and in fact she was a very good writer. And it's like, yeah, I know, you told me. This book is also presented as if it's an unbiased account, but it's very clear from the start where Ann Rowell stands and what she thinks of these people, and that she wants us to think that too. The very best part of this book for me was the afterword at the end, where she talks about her process researching and writing this book and how her thoughts and feelings changed the more people she spoke to about Lisa and Chris. That was interesting and I appreciated that transparency, and I just wish that the whole book had been written that way, with Ann Rowell as like a character in the book, because of course, like in this case, we really don't know what happened, and Ann Rowell doesn't know what happened either. The only people who know are Chris, who is dead, and Lisa, who did not speak to her. So presenting it as if this is what happened strikes me as a little bit disingenuous. I'm not mad that I read this by any means, but I'm not sure I will be reaching for any other Ann Rowell books in the future. The next book I read in March was Death Note Volume 2 by Tsugumi Ohba and Takeshi Obata. This clearly is the second installment of a manga that I started back in January. It's about a teenager named Light who has a notebook that can kill people. When he finds it, he decides that he's going to use it to kill criminals, but it pretty quickly escalates. An interesting element to this series for me is how, even though the situation spirals out of control pretty much immediately, Light believes himself to be smarter than basically everyone around him, and in his hubris, he still believes that he is always in control of everything that happens to him, even though to the reader it's very clear that he's not. I also really like the character of Ryuk. He's the Shinigami death god thing. He's just like a really jovial and fun character, which is kind of an unexpected direction to go when you're like writing a demon, I think. This series is good, but I don't find myself itching to pick them up when I'm not reading them. This one also made me pretty angry because, and this is a spoiler, they finally introduced an actual female character and then evidently she was killed off pretty much immediately. I'm still not 100% sure that she's actually dead. It might have been a misdirection, but it still made me mad at the time and really drew my attention to the fact that the women in this book are just really non-entities. The next book I read was Death in Her Hands by Otessa Moshfegh. This is the third Otessa Moshfegh book that I've read now, and she's definitely one of my favorite writers working today. This is about a woman named Vesta who is out walking her dog one day when she stumbles across a note that says something like, "Her name is Magda, No one will ever know who killed her. Here is her body. But there's no body. Vesta is in her 70s. She's recently widowed and she's new to the area where she lives. She has just bought like an old Girl Scout camp. That was just like a fun little element that I really appreciated. I love summer camps, and the idea of living on one is just delightful to me. But anyway, after finding the note, Vesta becomes completely consumed by this mystery, and her imagination really starts to run away from her. This is really typical of Otessa Moshfegh in that it's a deep character study that also has very, very dark humor. It kind of made me think of Murder, She Wrote, but like if Jessica Fletcher had no idea what she was doing. I got interrupted, so anything that's changed, that's why. And I also got something in my eye, so I probably look a lot more Marla Singer than I did before. Death in Her Hands also has this element of facing and coming to terms with trauma as Vesta slowly reveals more and more about her marriage. That was very interesting and compelling and well done. Ultimately, I liked the first 40% of this a lot, and then I also liked the ending quite a lot. But there was like 30% in the middle where I just started to find it kind of frustrating to read. And I think that's because you know that everything or most things that are happening are just pretend and conjecture. Also, my friend who read this at about the same time as me told me that it's very similar to Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk, like to the point where it's maybe not worth reading both. So that's interesting. Something to keep in mind if you've already read that one. But at the end of the day, I liked it fine. I will read anything that Otessa Moshfegh writes, so I'm happy with it. I definitely would recommend this to people who are already fans of Otessa Moshfegh and her work. But if you've never read her before, this is not the place I would suggest starting. I also wouldn't hate it if just one Otessa Moshfegh book didn't have fat phobia in it. Like, I realize that it's coming from her characters, and her characters are bad people, but it's in all of her books. So like maybe in the next one we could just not include that. I don't know. Death in Her Hands is out on the 21st of April. After that, I read He Started It by Samantha Downing. If you've been around here for a while, you may remember that Samantha Downing's first book, My Lovely Wife, is one of my favorite thrillers that I've ever read, so I was really looking forward to her follow-up. It's about 3 adult siblings whose wealthy, estranged grandfather has just died, and he's left a provision in his will that in order for them to get their inheritance, they have to recreate a road trip that he took them on when they were kids. 2 of them are now married, so their spouses come along. Pretty much right off the bat, you start to get the feeling that something weird happened on that first road trip, and you're very slowly fed clues about that. First of all, I will say that this was absolutely off the wall, bonkers fun, but because Samantha Downing is so good on character, it still felt relatively grounded for a thriller until like the end of Act 2, when the narrator protagonist did something that kind of came out of nowhere and just seemed so extreme that I didn't think it was set up that well, and it seemed a bit out of character. And then the ending just totally jumped the shark. It did that thing that happens sometimes in thrillers where one character's personality is just totally obfuscated throughout the book in order to make the twist surprising, and to be honest, I just have very little patience for that. And I was thinking, like, with My Lovely Wife, I think a lot of readers can predict the ending, but I was okay with that, and I know like a lot of other people I've talked to about this book are also okay with that, because the twist and like being surprised, they don't really feel like the point of that book. Like, that point is more just to like get in the heads of these like fucked up people and go on this wild ride. But it's almost as if Samantha Downing like heard that criticism and then really overcorrected. That's my diagnosis. He Started It is out on the 20th of April in the UK, although just from doing my little bit of research for this video, it seems that the US release date has been pushed to July. So just so you know. The next book I read was Goodbye Vitamin by Rachel Khong. This is a sweet little novel about a woman in her, I think, late 20s, maybe early 30s, who has just been dumped by her fiance, and she returns home from the holidays, and her mom asks her to stay in order to help care for her father, who is in the early stages of Alzheimer's. I connected with this book very deeply. It was almost a little bit too real, but it was actually like the perfect book for me to read right now. Khong does a really good job of balancing out the kind of heavy subject matter of this book by bringing a lot of levity and exuberance to her prose, and there are a lot of really dorky jokes in it too, which I appreciated. It does have a touch of that MFA voice, which, like, if you know, you know. Sometimes that bugs me, but in this one it was fine. This is about coming to terms with endings and making room for new beginnings, which I think is something that could resonate with a lot of people right now. This will definitely be staying on my shelves and is something that I'm pretty sure I'm going to revisit many times in the future. I'm speaking too low in my voice. I need to speak up higher. It's hurting my vocal cords. It's weird how that happens sometimes. I feel like my voice changed in the middle of this video. The last book that I finished in March was Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. For someone who doesn't read a lot of YA, I have read a lot of Rainbow Rowell. This is, I think, the 4th book by her that I've read. I know that she's like somewhat controversial, but I really enjoyed the tone that she sets in her books. I read Rainbow Rowell's Fangirl at a time when I was really kind of getting back into reading after getting like pretty burnt out on it in college. A literature degree will do that to you, unfortunately. And that book is about a girl who goes to college and she writes like a very successful and well-known fan fiction for basically what is, in her universe, Harry Potter. And then this is sort of, I guess, like the companion to Fangirl, and it is the characters from the book series slash fanfiction that the character in Fangirl writes. So this is like a wizard boarding school fantasy with vampires and queer romance. This definitely has like Harry Potter vibes because it was originally meant to be a stand-in for Harry Potter, but I do think that Rainbow Rowell has managed to make something that's very original. The world is very whimsical. I love the way the magic works in this. They use like common phrases and idioms in order to do magic. So there's a lot of wordplay in here that is pretty clever and fun. The sort of like vibe of the world reminded me a lot of Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. It's just really sweet and it's fun to read and I liked it. This also is a copy that my friend Tolly left to me. It sounds like she died. No, she lent it to me. And she wrote all these little notes in it to me. So it kind of felt like having her here with me, which was perfect for like right now, just like being kind of stressed and like weirded out by the world. It was like very just like light and easy, comforting read. That's not to say that I don't have my gripes. For one thing, I feel like bi erasure runs rampant in here. I feel like I've seen this before where like a character who has dated the opposite sex before suddenly enters into a relationship with a member of the same sex, and suddenly there's all this pressure from themselves and from the world around them to say like, are you gay or not? Some people are not gay or not. Many people are bisexual, and this book did that. And at the end, the character is like, oh, by the way, I am gay, and it's like, you can be bi though. Oh, that bugged me. This also just sort of espouses a very neoliberal ideology that I can't quite get behind. The Dumbledore equivalent in this book has risen to power on a platform of progressivism in response to the discrimination and elitism that he sees in the magical community, but his methods are like not okay. And it's just like, yeah, fascism is bad, but what if progressivism is also fascism? And I just like don't appreciate that messaging that much. And at the end, when everything is wrapped up, I still feel like the like racist mentality is like supported in this community. And I do know like there's a sequel obviously, but I don't think that she planned for there to be a sequel when she first wrote this. So just gotta side-eye that whole thing a little bit. At the same time, I don't think I'm meant to have thought about this that hard. But still, I love Baz and I would die for him. All right, those are the books. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up. Hope you're doing okay in quarantine. I'm currently vlogging my owls, so keep an eye out for those videos. Let's have a chat down in the comments, and wherever you are, I hope you're staying safe. Okay, bye! I'm here to wrap up the March of March. Oh, this also took way too long to get to the kissing.